Okay, so chapter 11 is called language. Language is how we communicate using sounds or symbols. It is also how we express our feelings, our thoughts, our ideas, and our experiences. Our human language system has an hierarchical system. That's where components can be combined to form larger units, and it's also governed by rules. There are specific ways that we have to arrange different components to make language. Deaf children have sign language in order to communicate with each other. And that's why it was created so that deaf children could speak to one another and could speak to people who aren't deaf who learn their language. All humans with normal capacities develop a language and learn how to follow its complex rules. Language is something that is universal across all cultures. Language development is similar across all cultures, and all languages are unique but the same. So they have different words, sounds, and rules, but every language has nouns, verbs, negatives, questions, and past and present tense. So if we think about the history of language and how it was looked at in cognitive psychology, in 1957, B.F. Skinner first said that language is just verbal behavior. It's communicated through reinforcement, it's learned through reinforcement, and that's why language happens. It's just verbal behavior. And also, Noam Chomsky came up with the idea that the human language is coded in our genes, and there's an underlying basis for all language that makes it similar. Chomsky also said that children produce sentences that they've never heard and that have never been reinforced because he said it's coded in our genes. Psycholinguists discovered that there are psychological processes by which humans acquire and process language through comprehension, speech production, representation, and acquisition. So when the way we understand words is through our lexicon, which are all the words a person understands, semantics, which is the meaning of language, and lexical semantics, which is the meaning of words. Each word has one or more meanings. Sometimes there can also be complications in understanding words, such as the word frequency effect. We respond faster to high frequency words, and our eye movements while we're reading are going to happen rapidly. But if it's a low frequency word, which is a word we don't come across very much, we're going to look at those a lot longer because our brain can't process them as fast. And then we sometimes also have to use context to understand words with unfamiliar pronunciations. I mean, I know that you guys know that I'm not, that I'm from the southern part of the United States, and I'm sure that there are some words I pronounce that perhaps you would pronounce differently. In language, we can also have speech segmentation. That's when we perceive individual words, even though there are no silences between them. We still can understand the word meaning, we can understand the sounds, and we can have statistical learning and context. Lexical ambiguity happens when words have multiple meanings, like there and there and they are. Meaning dominance are some words that are can be used more frequently than others. There can be bias dominance or balanced dominance. Bias dominance happens when words have two or more meanings with different dominants, and balanced dominance have is when words have two or more meanings with about the same amount of dominance. Lexical priming happens when people briefly access all meanings of a word before relying on context to determine accurate meaning. So I already said before that semantics is the meaning of words and sentences. Syntax are the rules for combining words into sentences, and sentences are just a stringing together of words in sequence. We also have parsing, which is a mental grouping of the words into phrases. That's what helps the learner create meaning. Garden path sentences are sentences that begin by appearing to mean one thing, but then they end up meaning something else. Temporary ambiguity occurs when the initial words are ambiguous, but the meaning is made clear by the end of the sentence. The garden path model of parsing allows listeners to use heuristics or rules, these sort of shortcuts to group words into phrases. It also allows them to use grammatical structures of sentences that determine the parsing, and late closure, which is the parser assumes a new word is part of the current phrase. Constraint based approach to parsing combines syntax, word meaning, story context, and memory load. In 1995, there was a study done which looked at the visual world paradigm in the context of a scene. Eye movements were changed, and when information was given, which suggests that the revision of interpretation of a sentence is necessary, and linguistic and non linguistic information was used simultaneously. Coherence is the idea that we have representation of the text in one's mind that creates clear relations between parts of the text and between parts of the text and the story's main topic. When we inference, readers have to create information during their reading that isn't really said in the text. We can have different types of inferences where we connect objects and people. We can look at tools or methods and events in one clause caused by events in another sentence. So we basically have to infer meaning. We have to come up with what the meaning could be, but it has to be logical for the story. The situation model is when we have a mental representation of what a text is about. It can represent events that we're experiencing or a point of view of the protagonist. And then when we have the physiology of simulations, this is when approximately the same areas of the cortex are activated by actual movements and by reading related action words. And the activation is more extensive for actual movements. When we produce language, we're having a conversation. That's when two or more people are talking together. It can be dynamic, it can be rapid, everyone can follow. When we are engaging in a conversation and producing speech, we're given a new contract. The speaker constructs sentences so that they include the given information, new information, and that new information can then also become the given information. You have common ground where there's a synchronization between conversations. You also use similar grammatical constructions and reduce the computational loads in those conversations as you're speaking to someone else. There are a few other skills that are necessary for people to engage in effective conversations. There's the theory of mind, which says that being able to understand what others feel, think, or believe is important to having a conversation. Like you need to be able to empathize with them. And then there's also nonverbal communication. So as you're talking to somebody, you need to make facial expressions and gestures and change your tone of voice and give them other cues so that they know how to respond. Prosody is a pattern of intonation and rhythm that occurs in a speaker's voice. So it also allows the speaker to use emotion as they are going through something. Music can also be used as the language of emotion because when you listen to music, it creates emotions through sounds that if the sounds don't have meaning, the emotion, the music does. Language combines words and music, which combines tones to create structural sentence sequences that unfold over time. Hopefully, all of this discussion of language has helped you understand a little bit more about how we communicate with each other.